By 1943, Adolf Hitler believed something extraordinary, that Germany could still win the war, not through strategy, not through logistics, not through manpower, but through miracles. He pinned his hopes on what he called Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons, machines so advanced and devastating that they would shock the world, crush Germany's enemies, and restore the Reich's fading power. It was fantasy, a dangerous fantasy. Because while Germany still produced brilliant engineers and innovative designs, Hitler's obsession with superweapons did not strengthen the Wehrmacht, it broke it. And long before Allied armies reached Berlin, Germany was already bleeding to death from the cost of chasing impossible dreams. This is the story of how that happened. The problem begins, Germany's reality in 1942-43. To understand why Hitler clung to the idea of superweapons, we must understand the situation Germany faced by mid-war. After Stalingrad, El Alamein, and the Allied landings in North Africa, the German High Command confronted a grim reality. The Red Army was growing stronger. The United States was fully mobilized. Britain controlled the air over Europe. German fuel reserves were shrinking. Tank losses were becoming unsustainable. The Luftwaffe was losing experienced pilots. The U-boat fleet was being destroyed by Allied radar and escorts. Germany needed more tanks, more trucks, more fuel, more aircraft, more trained soldiers, more ammunition. But what it built instead were giants, super tanks, vengeance weapons, and experimental jets that consumed scarce resources. Hitler did not want weapons Germany needed. He wanted weapons that inspired fear, weapons that looked unstoppable on paper, weapons that seemed to promise a shortcut to victory. But Germany was not losing the war because it lacked futuristic technology. It was losing because it lacked logistics, fuel, manpower, and time. Hitler didn't want to hear that, so he sought salvation in the extraordinary. The Hitlerian mindset, when ideology overruled strategy. Hitler believed deeply in two things. 1. Willpower can overcome any material disadvantage. 2. A revolutionary weapon can overturn any battlefield situation. This belief was shaped by his memories of World War I, when Germany had introduced innovations like poison gas, U-boats, and stormtrooper tactics. In his mind, another breakthrough weapon will change everything again. But World War II was not World War I. The Allies had radar, code-breaking, vast industrial power, and oceans of raw materials. Germany had brilliant scientists, but lacked the production capacity to mass-produce their creations. Instead of recognizing this, Hitler doubled down on the idea that a single devastating invention would reverse Germany's fate, and the result was catastrophic. At the Tiger family, Germany builds monsters instead of armies. The Tiger Line tank was the most obvious example of Hitler's obsession manifesting in steel. When introduced in 1942, Tiger Line was a technical masterpiece. Enormous armor, a devastating 88mm gun, advanced optics, long-range killing power. But its problems were enormous. Expensive to build, slow to manufacture, extremely fuel-hungry, required constant maintenance, broke down frequently, weighed 57 tons, too heavy for most bridges, required specialized recovery vehicles, consumed 2 to 3x more resources than a Panzer IV. For every Tiger Germany produced, the US and Soviet Union produced 5 to 10 medium tanks, dozens of artillery guns, truck fleets, replacement parts, fuel stockpiles, trained mechanics. And instead of fixing these issues, Hitler ordered an even larger monster, the Tiger II, the King Tiger. It weighed 70 tons, was nearly impossible to recover if disabled, and its complexity made it almost unsustainable. German officers begged for more reliable medium tanks. Hitler wanted beasts. The Tiger family became a symbol of impressive engineering and disastrous strategy. The Maus, the 188-ton fantasy. Hitler's obsession didn't stop with the Tiger. He demanded an invincible tank. The result was the Maus, a 1d8-ton super-heavy tank so absurdly large that no bridge in Europe could support it. Its engine overheated constantly. It moved slower than a walking soldier. It consumed fuel Germany didn't have. It required specially built roads. It was impossible to transport Nerd. Each unit required 3 to 5 times the steel of a normal tank. Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister, begged Hitler to cancel the project. Hitler refused. 2 prototypes were built while German infantry froze in Russia. Their panzer divisions starved for fuel, and their cities burned under Allied bombing. It was madness disguised as engineering. The V-weapons, the costly revenge that changed nothing. The V-1 and V-2 rockets were astonishing achievements. The world had never seen weapons like them. Today, the V-2 is seen as the ancestor of modern ballistic missiles. But in 1944-45, it was a disaster for Germany. The V-2 program consumed massive amounts of steel, huge quantities of alcohol fuel, specialized factories, thousands of engineers, enormous transportation capacity, tens of thousands of forced laborers, scarce explosives. For what? A weapon that cost Germany far more than the damage it inflicted. A single V-2 rocket cost as much as a fighter squadron or a few dozen Panzer IV tanks, yet each rocket delivered a warhead that was smaller than a standard Allied bomber payload. The V-weapons did not destroy Allied industry, change the war, slow the invasion, break morale. Instead, they drained the German war economy when it needed tanks, planes, fuel, and trained soldiers. The jet program, brilliant but too late and misused. The Me-262 was one of the most advanced aircraft ever built. It could have been a major threat. But Hitler sabotaged his own jet program by insisting the Me-262 be converted into a bomber, delaying its deployment for months. Even worse, Germany lacked trained jet pilots. Fuel shortages crippled training. The jet's engines lasted only 10-25 flight hours. Runways were destroyed by Allied bombing. Maintenance was extremely complicated. Production was constantly disrupted. The jet was a masterpiece, but Germany had no way to use it effectively. Another miracle weapon wasted. The high cost of impossible dreams. By 1944, Germany needed thousands of replacement tanks, millions of rifle cartridges, hundreds of thousands of trucks, endless fuel, trained pilots, reliable infantry weapons, artillery shells, defensive fortifications, spare parts. What it produced instead were a handful of King Tigers, 2 Maus prototypes, rockets that changed nothing, jets that could not be used, railguns too heavy to move, super heavy tanks that broke bridges, exotic experiments that drained engineers' time. Germany built wonders, while the United States built armies. The Soviet Union built firepower. Britain built radar and air defense. Hitler built monuments to his own fantasies. And the Wehrmacht paid the price. The war Germany could not afford to fight by 1943, Hitler insisted that only revolutionary weapons could bring victory. But the German war economy was already drowning. Before a single superweapon rolled off the line, Germany was battling a far deadlier enemy: mathematics. Germany's industrial capacity was too small, its fuel reserves too limited, its manpower too drained, its transportation network too fragile, its factories too exposed to bombing. Every ton of steel, every liter of fuel, every engineer's hour had to be used with mathematical precision. And yet the Reich poured these resources into projects that consumed vast amounts of steel, required highly trained workers, demanded rare metals, used complex machinery, needed special factories, drained transportation systems, had no effect on the battlefield. Rather than focusing on what the Wehrmacht needed, Hitler focused on what impressed him personally, and that mismatch between fantasy and reality destroyed Germany's ability to wage war. The real crisis: Germany was running out of everything. By the start of 1944, Germany faced shortages in all essential areas. 1. Oil Romanian fields were bombed. Ploesti was devastated. Synthetic plants were attacked repeatedly. Panzer divisions could not train. Luftwaffe pilots often received only minutes of flight time. 2. Steel and industrial metals. The Navy still demanded U-boats. The Air Force needed thousands of fighters. The Army required tanks and artillery, but superweapons devoured high-grade steel. 3. Skilled labor engineers and machinists were sent to work on V-2 rockets, jet fighters, Panther, Tiger, King Tiger production, experimental weapons, giant artillery pieces. Meanwhile, the Wehrmacht lacked spare parts, and factories that built reliable Panzer IVs were starved of labor. 4. Factories and transportation rocket assembly and jet programs required special facilities often far from front lines. This forced Germany to transport huge components, engines, rocket fuel, technicians, launch equipment, specialized ammunition, all while Allied bombers destroyed rail lines day after day. 5. Time Germany had none left. But Hitler still demanded the impossible. The Panzer Zoo: too many designs, too few tanks. A defining difference between German and American tank production was standardization. The U.S. focused on the M4 Sherman, a few variants, massive production, identical parts, quick repair, universal training. Germany did the opposite. Between 1939 and 1945, the Wehrmacht used Panzershorns, Panzer II, Panzer 38T, Panzer III, Panzer IV, Panther, Tiger, King Tiger, Stoga III, Jagdpanzer IV, Jagdpanther, Jagdtiger, Hetzer, Marder series, Nashorn, Hummel, Vespa, Brummbär, dozens of prototypes. Each design required different engines, different wheels and tracks, different tools, different spare parts, different factories, different training, different maintenance crews. American mechanics could repair Shermans with their eyes closed. German mechanics needed encyclopedic knowledge just to keep a single division moving. Hitler loved complexity. War rewards simplicity. The Panther tank: brilliant, too brilliant. The Panther was one of the best tanks of the war, but in 1943, it was rushed to battle before it was ready. At Kursk, more Panthers broke down due to mechanical failures, then were destroyed by Soviet fire. Its problems included weak final drives, gearboxes that overheated, engines prone to fire, fragile suspension, difficulty traveling long distances, complex maintenance requirements. If Germany had chosen to perfect one reliable design, like the Panzer IV with upgrades, it might have fielded far more armored divisions. But Hitler wanted elite weapons, not reliable ones. The air war, another place where superweapons failed. Hitler believed rockets and jets would reverse the air war. But by the time Me-262s and V-2s were deployed, Germany's aviation network was collapsing. The Luftwaffe's biggest problems were no trained pilots, no fuel, no spare parts, no protection for factories, no radar network to match Britain's, no mass production equivalent to the US and UK, constant bombing, inexperienced replacements. Instead of focusing on cheap, fast-to-build fighters like the FW-190 or Bf-109, Germany split its resources into jets, rocket planes, heavy fighters, experimental interceptors, guided missile projects, radar avoidance schemes, V-1 and V-2 launch sites. The result? Germany's superweapons flew, but its air force died. The V-2 rocket, Hitler's most expensive failure. The V-2 program consumed more resources than the Manhattan Project. And what did Germany get? A weapon that could not hit military targets, could not change strategy, could not neutralize Allied air power, could not stop the invasion, could not destroy ports, could not affect production, could not threaten Allied armies in the field. It killed civilians, tragically, randomly, with no military value. A single V2 cost as much to produce as 24 STG-44 rifles for every soldier in a division, a squadron of fighters, or dozens of reliable tanks. Hitler invested in terror, not victory. Just the jet campaign. Too little, too late. The M262 was a marvel, but its engines needed scarce metals. Metals Germany no longer had. Even worse, most engines lasted 10 to 20 hours. Pilots had almost no jet training. Production was constantly disrupted. Fuel shortages left jets grounded. Runways were bombed daily. Spare parts were unavailable. Many jets were destroyed on the ground. By 1945, Germany had built around 1,400 Me-262s, but only a few hundred ever flew in combat. Hitler's insistence that they serve as bombers was a strategic disaster. Every day the Me-262 sat idle was a day Allied bombers destroyed more German cities and more German factories. The obsession with gigantic weapons, from railguns to the Maus Germany built. The 1,350-ton railgun Schwerer Gustav, the monstrous Dora cannon, super heavy artillery pieces, the Maus tanks, massive coastal guns, bizarre experimental weapons. These were not war-winning instruments. They were monuments to Hitler's imagination. Each one required thousands of workers, special ammunition, custom rail systems, enormous fuel consumption, engineers diverted from useful projects, factories capable of large castings, huge supply chains, defended positions, crews that could have been used elsewhere. Meanwhile, German infantry lacked boots and winter gear. Frontline divisions had to fight without air support. Tank crews lacked training. Artillery divisions had no trucks. The Eastern Front starved for fuel. Factories needed basic materials. U-boats needed radar detectors. Hitler spent resources on prestige weapons, while his army fought with shortages. Schauter saying, German generals begged for simplicity. By 1944, generals like Guderian, Manstein, and Model pleaded with Hitler. Simplify tank production, prioritize fuel, stop building heavy monsters, build more Panzer V's and Stu-Gs, focus on fighter production, abandon the V2, concentrate on logistics, fix transportation and rail lines, centralize industrial planning, standardize parts, reinforce infantry divisions, improve anti-air defenses. Hitler ignored them. Why? Because he believed superweapons were Germany's only hope. In reality, they were Germany's downfall. The collision between Hitler's fantasy and German reality. By 1944, most German generals knew the truth. Germany didn't need miracle weapons. It needed fuel, ammunition, spare parts, trucks, and infantry. But Hitler would not accept this. He was convinced that a single, decisive superweapon could still turn the tide. He repeated the same phrase again and again. When the new weapons arrive, everything will change. But the war refused to cooperate, because by 1944, Germany's situation was no longer desperate. It was mathematically impossible. And every resource poured into a superweapon became a resource that frontline troops did not receive. Infantry starved while experiments flourished. The German army of 1944 or 45 was collapsing from exhaustion. A typical infantry division needed rifles, machine guns, mortars, artillery shells, medical supplies, winter uniforms, replacement boots, spare parts for transport, field rations, horses, feed, veterinary care, anti-tank weapons, trucks, and fuel. Yet divisions received half their ammunition, a fraction of needed winter clothing. barely any mail, which destroyed morale, little artillery support, almost no replacement troops, dwindling food, horses dying of exposure, trucks immobilized without fuel, bicycles used instead of vehicles. Meanwhile, Hitler was demanding new jet prototypes, new rocket designs, new super heavy tanks, new guided weapons, new long-range artillery experiments, new anti-aircraft concepts, new super submarines. German soldiers joked bitterly, "Let the Wunderwaffe fight the Russians. We will freeze and starve while they test engines." It was gallows humor, because they knew it was true. Now the Eastern Front suffers while Hitler builds Mausenters. The Eastern Front swallowed the majority of the German army. By 1944, its divisions were hollow shells. A typical infantry division that once had 15,000 men was now fighting with 8,000, sometimes 6,000, sometimes 4,500, occasionally as few as 2,800. And yet Hitler continued ordering King Tigers, Jagdtigers, Maus prototypes, gigantic guns, experimental aircraft, advanced rockets. These machines consumed skilled factory labor, specialized metals, massive amounts of steel, enormous quantities of fuel, precious transportation capacity, technicians and engineers. Time the Reich did not have all, while infantry divisions, the backbone of the Wehrmacht, were collapsing from lack of basic equipment. Frontline commanders wrote increasingly desperate reports. "We have no ammunition. We cannot move our artillery. Our men are barefoot. Our rifles are worn out. Our horses have died. Our replacements are boys. We have no fuel to retreat." And Hitler ignored them. The superweapons that never arrived, broken promises and failed hope. Hitler promised again and again. The Me-262 would sweep Allied bombers from the sky. The V-2 would collapse British morale. The Tiger II would crush Soviet armor. The America murder bomber would destroy New York. The Maus would be invincible. Rocket interceptors would stop bombing raids. New torpedoes would sink Allied convoys. But none of these promises matched reality. Me-262, jet fighter, arrived too late, too few pilots, too little fuel, too many mechanical failures, bombed on the ground before takeoff. V-2 rockets, military uselessness, astronomical cost, no strategic impact. Tiger II tanks, powerful gun, impressive armor, catastrophic mechanical weakness, fuel consumption impossible to sustain, transported only by rail, which was constantly bombed. Maus super heavy tank, never operational, could not cross bridges, too slow for battle, engineering drain for no gain. Rocket interceptors, Natter, Me-163, deadly to their own pilots, extreme fuel consumption, minimal combat impact. The superweapons arrived, but their impact was a fraction of what Hitler imagined. They impressed engineers, not armies. America built thousands. Hitler built symbols. The decisive contrast of the war was this. The United States built what it needed. Hitler built what he dreamed of. America produced 49,000 Sherman tanks, 88,000 landing craft, 300,000 aircraft, 7 million trucks, 100,000 howitzers, 8,000 Liberty ships, billions of rounds of ammunition. Germany, meanwhile, produced 492 Tiger I tanks, 500 Tiger II tanks, 2 Maus prototypes, a handful of railguns, a few hundred Me-262 jets, thousands of V-2 rockets that accomplished nothing, dozens of experimental prototypes that never saw combat. Hitler wasted industrial capacity that Germany could not afford to waste. Instead of 10,000 Panthers, he built 1,300 King Tigers. Instead of 50,000 reliable trucks, he built rockets and super tanks. Instead of strengthening divisions, he stripped them of fuel and ammunition to supply experimental projects. When the Allies advanced toward Germany, they found divisions with no artillery, tanks abandoned from lack of fuel, aircraft rusting on airfields, infantry units fighting with captured Soviet rifles, cavalry units using horses because there were no trucks, Volkssturm units armed with shotguns and homemade weapons. Meanwhile, German factories were still assembling V-2 rockets, jet prototypes, and giant tanks that had no chance of saving the Reich. The final insult. Rare resources were wasted on impossible projects. Germany suffered critically from shortages of tungsten, chromium, aluminum, high-grade steel, rubber, aviation fuel, ball bearings, copper, nickel. These materials were essential for aircraft engines, tank armor, artillery barrels, ammunition production, radio equipment, truck engines, railroad repair, submarine construction. Yet Hitler diverted rare metals into prestige weapons. As a result, aircraft engines overheated, tank armor quality declined, artillery barrels wore out quickly, truck production slowed, soldiers lacked radios, U-boats were delivered incomplete. Factories struggled to repair equipment. The superweapons did not merely fail to help Germany. They actively reduced Germany's ability to fight. Schatzi, like the Wehrmacht, knows it has been sacrificed to a delusion. By the end of 1944, letters and diary entries of German officers became increasingly bitter. Some wrote, "We asked for horses and received rockets. We asked for fuel and received promises. We asked for spare parts and received speeches. We asked for ammunition and received prototypes. The Führer builds monuments, not weapons." Even Albert Speer, loyal to Hitler until the end, admitted, "The pursuit of miracle weapons was one of the most disastrous decisions of the war." While Allied armies advanced on all fronts, Hitler traveled between bunkers examining blueprints for weapons that had no bearing on reality. The Wehrmacht did not lose the war because it lacked genius. It lost because genius was wasted serving a fantasy. When miracles became a strategy, by late 1944 and early 1945, Hitler was living in a world increasingly detached from reality. His armies were starving for resources. His divisions were hollow shells. His air force was nearly gone. His armored formations were broken. His railways were collapsing under Allied bombing. His cities were burning. His officers were exhausted. His people were terrified of the coming Soviet advance. And yet, Hitler continued to say the same thing. The new weapons will come. They will turn the war. They will bring victory. These promises were repeated so frequently that they became the regime's final propaganda line. But the catastrophe was not caused merely by wishful thinking. It was caused by action, by diverting resources from Germany's real needs to projects that had no chance of affecting the war. This is how the Reich collapsed from the inside, while its leader waited for miracles that would never come. The beginning of the end, the failure to prioritize defense. By 1944, Germany needed to build fighter aircraft, anti-aircraft guns, ammunition, armored vehicles, spare parts, fuel production facilities, fortifications, U-boats with radar detection, reliable trucks, bridging equipment, defensive lines, rapid repair rail units. But Hitler insisted on building rockets, super heavy tanks, experimental submarines, one-off jet prototypes, long-range America bombers, railguns, armored monstrosities, dozens of unique tank destroyer models, anti-aircraft weapons. Too complex to mass produce. Germany's defensive capability collapsed because Hitler was still fighting an imaginary future war, not the real war unfolding outside his bunker. D-Day, the moment when Hitler needed men, not miracles. On June 6, 1944, the Allies landed in Normandy. This was the moment Hitler had promised would be stopped by new weapons. Instead, Germany faced the invasion with divisions lacking artillery, units at 50-60% strength, Luftwaffe nearly wiped from the sky, no tanks with enough fuel to reposition, rail lines destroyed, no ammunition reserves, no mobile reserves, infantry that had not been properly trained. While Hitler focused on rockets and King Tigers, the Atlantic Wall was undermanned, undersupplied, and fatally incomplete. One German general said bitterly, "We defended Europe with miracles promised, not preparations made." The Battle of the Bulge, when Hitler bet everything on fantasy. Hitler believed that the Ardennes offensive, Wacht am Rhein, would split the Allied armies and force a negotiated peace. But by December 1944, Germany had almost no fuel, no air support, exhausted infantry, crumbling logistics, worn-out tanks, railways in ruins, roads destroyed by bombing, no reserves, no ability to replace losses. Instead of preparing a defensive line that might have slowed the Allies for months, Hitler spent his remaining fuel on an offensive doomed from the beginning. German officers begged him to preserve resources for the defense of Germany. Hitler refused. He believed one more miracle would save everything. Instead, the offensive collapsed, and the Wehrmacht never recovered. The Eastern Front, a bleeding army abandoned. While Hitler dreamed of superweapons, the Eastern Front disintegrated. By early 1945, Soviet armies outnumbered German forces 6-1. The Red Army had overwhelming artillery superiority. Soviet tank formations could advance without challenge. German infantry had no winter clothing. Divisions lacked ammunition. Horses replaced trucks. Wounded soldiers died due to lack of medical supplies. Morale collapsed. The front was held by teenagers and old men. Yet rocket factories continued operating, and Hitler still demanded new jet prototypes. One officer wrote, "The Eastern Front collapses while the Führer demands engines for toys." Another said, "We needed rifles. Instead, we got rockets." The final months, when superweapons became burdens. By 1945, every Wunderwaffe project became a liability. Me-262, jets grounded by lack of fuel, spare parts, and runways. King Tigers abandoned on roads, out of fuel, or broken down. Panther tanks disabled by mechanical failures, not enemy fire. V-2 rockets, hitting cities but accomplishing nothing militarily. Experimental submarines, nowhere near completion. Railguns, immobile targets destroyed by Allied bombers. Mouse prototypes, too heavy to move, left behind as curiosities. The weapons that were supposed to bring salvation instead became symbols of waste. The Allies built a war machine. Hitler built a dream. The Allies invested in production, logistics, reliable equipment, radar, communications, ammunition, trucks, fuel, air power, training, shipbuilding, standardization, infrastructure. That is what wins modern wars. But Hitler invested in shock value, prestige, fear, symbolism, gigantic machines, projects that looked impressive, weapons too complex to mass produce, ideas 10 years ahead of their time, fantasies that ignored reality. The result was inevitable. Just the last weeks, Hitler still believes the lie. Even in April 1945, with the Red Army in Berlin and the Allies on the Elbe, Hitler continued talking about miracle weapons. He still believed jet fighters would return in force, new submarines would cut Allied supply lines, new rockets would strike London, new anti-aircraft weapons would clear the skies. None of it existed. None of it mattered. But Hitler could not face reality. He preferred dreams to truth, and his dreams killed Germany. The final analysis: how superweapons doomed the Reich. Hitler's obsession with Wunderwaffe did not merely fail to save Germany. It actively destroyed Germany's ability to fight. It drained fuel. It drained steel. It drained manpower. It drained engineers. It drained transport capacity. It drained time. It drained attention. It drained the Wehrmacht's last chance for survival. While Hitler built machines that impressed museums and engineers, his army lacked bullets, boots, trucks, radios, tanks that worked, planes that could fly, pilots with fuel, artillery shells, winter clothing, reinforcements, trained officers, basic supplies. Germany did not lose because of lack of genius. It lost because genius was wasted on fantasy. Hitler sought miracle weapons. But what Germany needed was a sober, realistic, industrial strategy built around reliability and mass production. The Allies had that. Hitler never did. And the final message. Hitler believed superweapons would restore his empire. Instead, they hastened its destruction. Because in modern war, victory does not come from miracles. It comes from logistics, training, coordination, numbers, reliability, fuel, industry, strategy, discipline, and leadership grounded in reality. Germany had brilliant engineers, but the Allies had something far more powerful: a practical strategy, a unified industrial base, and no tolerance for fantasies. That is why the Reich fell. Not because its weapons were inferior, but because its leader chased dreams while the world burned around him.